It's a pleasure to be here to talk about the biggest and the best railroad on Long Island. You all hear me back there? Okay, I don't need a mic, do I? Okay, good, good. The program notice showed me standing next to a stove at the St. James Railroad Station. That is the oldest Long Island Railroad built station, built in 1873. Hewlett is 3 years older, built in 1870. But St. James has the original potbelly stove. You know, that's the original potbelly stove that was in the St. James Railroad Station building. There's 3 stations on the Port Jeff branch. I'll talk about Port Jeff branch just momentarily because it's interesting with the story of the potbelly stoves. There's a potbelly stove in Port Jefferson, which I had obtained and donated to the railroad. There's a potbelly stove in the Green Lawn Station, which Paul Proctor, a foreman in the engineering department, donated to the railroad when he was in charge of the reconstruction work at Green Lawn Station. He said, Dave, I got the pot. He knew I love history. He said, I'll put the potbelly stove in the waiting room. That'd be okay? I said, I love it. But I said, you know, donate it to Green Lawn Centerport Historical Society and get a tax write-off. And he said, don't worry about that, Dave. And he put it in the waiting room. I obtained another potbelly stove, which was in the Roslyn Railroad Station waiting room. It was stolen about 10 years ago. Well, the engineering department took the stove out to repair the door on the stove, and it hasn't been seen since. So I categorize it as stolen. But anyway, let me move on. Talking about the Long Island Railroad, charted on April 24th, 1834, and the purpose was to run from the Brooklyn waterfront out to Greenport, out on the eastern end of Long Island. It was like almost like a, not a branch line, but I'm looking for a word to describe, a bridge line. Carry trains from Washington. People would go up to the New Jersey waterfront, Jersey City, get on the ferry and come over to the Brooklyn waterfront, then go all the way out to Greenport on the Long Island Railroad. The route was chosen because the center of the island was basically barren. The villages and the towns were built up on the north shore and the south shore. So the fastest, easiest way to go would be right through the center of Long Island. And that's why that route was chosen. It was completed in June of 1844. It thrived for about 4 years. And then in 1848, bridges were built along the Connecticut shoreline, and trains were able to run up to Boston through Connecticut. And then the purpose of the Long Island Railroad basically fell a little bit defunct. Then they realized, okay, we've got to stretch ourselves out to serve the north and the south shore.
How long did that take?
It took a number of years, and there was many competing railroads that were building at the same time too, like the South Side Railroad. But anyway, I'll show you this little map here. This is basically the route of the railroad today, showing the stations, and I just added Elmhurst and Corona, and of course you had Metz, Willets Point over here, and going out to Port Washington. In the waiting room at Great Neck Station, I'm not quite sure about the New York and Flushing Railroad, known as the North Shore Railroad, but anyway.
Subsidiary, yes.
Yeah, and anyway, it was a subsidiary, and Poppenhusen was the leader of that railroad to get the railroad built out to this area. And this shows you a map of the Flushing and North Side Railroad, and it went up to Whitestone Landing too. Here's a map showing you the branch starts just a little bit east of Woodside Station is where the Port Washington branch switch off to come up this way. And at one time was known as Winfield Junction. And then you had Elmhurst, Corona, seems like a dirty word today, Corona. And then Shea and World's Fair Station, that used to be near the area where Shea Stadium was built. And then at Whitestone Junction, you had the Whitestone branch, and went up to College Point, Malba, Whitestone, and Whitestone Landing. And then the old Central Railroad cut through the Flushing and Casena. So it's quite a complex history that is involved with the railroad being built up this way. Here's a map in 1873 showing the Flushing and North Side Railroad. There's Poppenhusen, I think the name is, Poppenhusen. And he built the Flushing and North Side Railroad. And there is a monument to him in Queens. Not sure the exact location. College Point, yes, thank you.
But how long did that branch last? How long was it in existence?
It merged with the Long Island Railroad in 1876, when the railroads basically merged, the different railroads merged into the Long Island Railroad.
Dave,
Yes.
the Whitestone branch was abandoned in 1934.
Okay, yeah, we'll get there.
Very hard.
Here's an old World War II timetable with the advertisement, buy U.S. savings bonds for victory. And this shows you, this is the same timetable, 1943, and they had published the distance from Penn Station. And Great Neck is 15.7 miles from Penn Station. This is probably one of the earliest known photographs of the Long Island Railroad train. This was at Woodside in 1872. And here's Woodside Station. This is looking east. And here's another shot, Winfield Junction. This is about 1910. There was a signal tower there that controlled the switches. This was the Long Island Railroad main line, and this was the Port Washington branch switching off at Winfield. And Winfield Tower, this is 1910. And actually the tower burned in, what year would that have been, Ed, do you think? 1970s, someplace around there? Yeah, right. But anyway,
Did they build it?
and you know, no, where they control from Harold Tower, I think. And
Yeah, they moved the controls to Harold Tower, and they spiked the siding that it controlled along the main line. They spiked it closed.
okay.
Basically, it screwed up the operation of the railroad, because you used to be able to send Port Washington trains out the main line as far as Wind Tower.
No, how about that? Here's an old shot there inside the tower. Another shot, 1925, Winfield Station. Here's a substation. These electrical substations were all around the railroad. There must have been 25 or 30 of them. I think most of them have been demolished. I think this one is gone. Would you know? I keep looking at Ed. Ed Kohler is a member of the Sunrise Trail chapter of the National Railway Historical Society, good friend of mine, and he's here to keep me honest tonight. Thank you, Ed.
I commuted for 30 years past that building, and right now at the moment, I can't tell you if it's there or not.
Well, take a look.
Like you, I'm occasionally having...
Yeah, how about that?
What went on in the substation?
The substation was where the electric power transmission lines transmit high
25,000 volt
high voltage.
current was brought in and fed up to, and I'm not sure how many were at there, I've got the numbers at home, rotary converters which changed the 25,000 volt alternating current to 600 volt direct current, which was then used to power the third rail.
Right.
And so you needed many of them because they only.
Yes. Oh, yes. Yeah.
DC only has a very short extension.
They still use the same setup today?
They're not the big substations. I think a lot of the power is, yeah,
It's
it's
still the same basic system, although the substations are now, well, we called them erector sets when they put them in the late 70s, late 60s, early 70s. They're now all solid state, what's the word? I'm looking for the, let's just say they're solid state electronics making the conversion.
yeah, you don't need those big buildings anymore. This is a fabulous photograph. I got this at a show, and I found this photograph. There's the Winfield electric substation being constructed, and there's the crew. I got this at one of these antique shows. $10 I got it for. I thought that was a nice grab. Elmhurst Station, coming out to the first station there.
You got it cheap?
Elmhurst, yeah, it's very similar to what the old Oyster Bay Railroad station looked like, and that's why I had put that photograph in there. This was built in 1888, demolished in 1927. Here's another shot. Nice postcard view, I think this is. And then Corona Station. And here's the
Okay,
shelter
hold on a
sheds.
second. You
Yes.
see that red brick building in the background?
Yes?
Has anyone heard of a little company called Tiffany?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's the original Tiffany factory.
Really? How about that?
It's gone. The building's gone now.
I remember that. How about that? Wow. Incredible. Oh, this is the World's Fair station for the 1939 World's Fair. This shows you could come right out of Penn Station and go out to the World's Fairgrounds. In the later years, then Shea Stadium was built there. Now it's called Met's Willets Point Station. I was looking for some shots really related to Shea Stadium, and I found some photographs. These were Long Island Railroad mini maids. Does anybody remember years ago the girls used to dress up like these cheerleading outfits that would go into Penn Station and hand out brochures and that, and they called them mini maids. Well, here's one of them sitting on a car with a promotional poster. It looks like a political poster, and I was told she wasn't supposed to be doing that, but anyway. Here's the point. Stephanie Sparks, she was with Jerry Philbin of the New York Jets, and they honored him as a honorary engineer, and he was sitting in the engineer's cab holding his certificate. And as she is, he's going to throw the ball to, and this was at Shea. And there he is for the football fans. I don't know whether anybody remembers him. He's not like a Joe Namath, that's for sure.
He had a restaurant
And
in
yes.
for a couple of years.
Really? Yeah. And here's a little card that was put out too, honorary engineers. Broadway Station. It's an old postcard view.
If you go to Broadway Station now, that building is still there. It's been jacked up when they eliminated the grade crossing, but the basic building is still there.
And that's Broadway Main Street.
Yeah.
Broadway Main Street. Well, this is a newspaper article back, when was it there? Back in the 70s, was it? Oh, yeah, 1996. Wow. This poor guy, the shoe shine guy, had been there for how many decades. The MTA was going to raise his rent from $1,000 a month to $6,000 a month.
What are they, nuts?
Mayor Giuliani went down there, notified all the press to be there, and he had his shoes shine there, and then the MTA dropped their cost increase and left it at $1,000. And that's where And there's a picture of me when I had darker hair with the man. Nice. What was his name? Anthony Avina. Yeah, the MTA backed off on that one. To get off the Port Wash branch for a second while I'm on this particular subject, back when the Ronkonkoma electrification took place, the railroad was building a huge storage yard at Ronkonkoma. There was an elderly woman, I'm talking very old, she lived in a house which was on the perimeter of the yard expansion. The MTA wanted to buy from her. She refused, and the MTA was going to start proceedings to expropriate the land from her. Well, after this incident with Delfino at Broadway Main Street Station, the MTA rethought it and they said, hey, we don't want to take on this old lady at Ronkonkoma. So they built the high security fence down the perimeter, and they built the high security fence around her property. And they let her, she stayed there until she died, then they bought the property. But anyway, it's a great way the MTA backs off of some things when it's politically appropriate. This is a nice little railroad station. Look at the architecture there. That's incredible. Murray Hill Station. Beautiful architecture. Look at those windows.
Didn't use it very long at all.
And there's another postcard shot. And here's was elevated 1914. This photo's dated when it was, I guess, almost when it was brand new.
That building is now gone, long gone.
Yeah. Flushing Main Street Station. And that beautiful building there. This was September 8, 1918 photograph. Here's another shot, trackside. Now the railroad renovated this station back in the late 1990s. And the Capitol construction manager called me over to the station. He says, got something interesting to show you. In the basement, there was a huge shelf unit. When they removed the shelf unit, there was a door behind the shelf unit. So when they opened the door and they flicked the switch, there was a huge model railroad in the room. And this was the Crocheron and Northern Railroad in Flushing. They had a beautiful layout, and amazingly, they took, all the trains were gone, but they left all of the buildings and the landscaping there. It was beautiful work that the people had done, but I guess when the club folded or whatever, they took their trains and went home. Anyway, JC Flushing, this was where the Whitestone branch trains were switched off. This is College Point Station, Malba Station. Then you come out to Whitestone, very substantial building.
That was also the general offices of the Flushing and North Shore.
No, okay, that's why it was so big, I guess, huh? Okay, and then you come to Whitestone Landing, there was a small station. And it was actually, well, that's a Flushing Creek Bridge.
You can see the approaches to it if you know where to look from.
What's behind it? What's behind it, Ed, do you know?
Yes, I do know what that is, and you're not going to be happy. That's a garbage conveyor.
Is that right?
The Flushing Meadows, Flushing Meadow Park, that whole area was filled with ashes and sweeping debris from Brooklyn.
How about that?
There was a company called the Brooklyn Ash Company that had a fleet of 20 gondola cars, for lack of a better description, that were loaded at various locations throughout Brooklyn, were brought by Long Island Railroad train to Corona, and they were distributed. They also, Brooklyn Ash also used some barges, and that's probably where they unloaded the
Wow.
barges from.
How about that? I learned
You know, we got a little
something.
place like Flushing Meadow Park, the World's Fair, City Field, Shea Stadium, if you're an old timer like some of us are.
Built on an ash dump.
All built on an ash dump.
It's white stone, and then the shipyard, and here's Auburndale Station. I put a circle around that strange monument there, whatever it is. Might be a planter on top of a pedestal. But then, yes, you know about that, Ed?
Well, I'm going to give you some, I don't know specifically, because I don't live that far from Auburndale, but the Auburndale Railroad Station was, the waiting room was leased out on Sundays. It was one of two on the Fort Washington branch that this happened to. It was leased out on Sundays to a church.
Oh,
What? So they would
They
have
held
people
their
that,
services in the waiting room on Sunday morning.
how about that?
that's one way to spread the.
Yeah. But anyway, there's another shot. This was a valuation photograph taken in 1918. Valuation photographs were taken by the Interstate Commerce Commission. During World War I, the railroads were confiscated by the government. After the war was over, then the government gave the railroads back their property. But in doing so, they had a valuation study to determine the value of the property, whatever. And they photographed just about everything, including the railroad stations. So I have a few of these books with these valuation photographs in them. And then here's an interesting one that shows a different type of monument in the same place. It's got look like a round ball on top. This was during the grade crossing elimination project. Bayside, 1900. Wow, look at that, huh? Horse and wagons. This is the Bayside Station prior to the grade crossing elimination project. In Douglaston, man, this was interesting. This was a promotional handout to promote people to come out to Long Island and to Douglaston Manor. What a beautiful station building was once at Douglaston. Look at the architecture on that building. It must have been built by the local people funding, I think, because I don't think, Ed, you think the Long Island Railroad would have built a station like that?
Well,
Yes, yeah, Carol.
We actually had a program about this several months ago, about the history of Kensington, which also built by the same brothers who developed Douglaston Manor. And they had such an overall arcing plan and concept for how they would have housing, high-end and well-built, lower-income housing in the same area. And they advertised it in New York City as a bucolic community and did a tremendous amount of promotion. So I bet those brothers built it.
Yeah, probably so.
What were their names?
Because I don't think the railroad would have built something like that.
Long Island architecture in the latter, in that time period, this does not bear the imprint of Long Island Railroad architecture.
Nah, it would have been too elaborate, too elaborate. There's another shot of it. Beautiful station building. It's not very pretty today, if anybody's seen it. Looking east, there was a pedestrian underpass. You go in here, go into the tracks and come up over there.
Yeah.
Douglaston Station, the dedication back in 1962. This was a photograph that was in the Long Island Railroad employee publication, the Long Island Railroader. And I just, in my archives, I came across this photograph too, an 8x10 black and white photograph, the Douglaston Station dedication, 1962. This is the Great Neck. Little Neck, I'm sorry. I'm pushing myself ahead. Little Neck Station. And this was a postcard view that I had. If you see the side, you can't see what it says on the sign, but at the Little Neck First National Bank, they have a nice framed photograph, and there's a close-up. They gave me a courtesy line credit. They paid me $100 too for scanning the postcard and sending it to them. They paid me $100. So I said, thank you very much. And anyway, they did add a little artistic license. They put Little Neck on the station sign, which was illegible, but that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that.
Dave,
Fred Weber.
the previous Little Neck station was basically in a general store.
Mm-hmm.
That building was moved up to Northern Boulevard. It sits behind the Queens County Savings Bank
Oh,
on Northern Boulevard.
how about that?
It wasn't a railroad-owned building, it was just, the railroad occupied space in it.
This is a Fred Weber shot. I do have Fred Weber 4x5 negatives of Great Neck. I got a bunch of them. And you'll see some of them in the show here. And I got Port Washington too. These 4x5 negatives were given to me by a guy, John Rayner, who was in the claims department on the railroad. He called me up one day back in, back in the early 90s. He said, Dave, I have shoe boxes full of Fred Weber negatives. He was a photographer with the claims department on the railroad. He says, do you want them? Come down and get them, or I'm going to throw them out. Before John hung up the phone, I was knocking on his door. I said, John, well, he had I call them shoe boxes. They were Kodak boxes, which were size of shoe boxes. Had 30 of them.
Wow.
I loaded into the trunk of my car, and I got home, and it took me several weeks to go through them. I ended up with about 6 shoe boxes. I had to throw away a couple of dozen shoe boxes because they were destroyed. The emulsion had peeled. It was in a detached garage with the cold winters and the hot summers, and it played havoc on the negatives. So, but I was able to capture some really nice ones. So,
This was one of them, right?
yeah, and I got a few of them. You'll see some of them at Great Neck too. Some of them were just such mundane photographs, like close-ups of the pavement at a grade crossing, or close-ups of stairways. That's like, I threw those out too. What good are they, This, I don't know what road this is. Does anybody fathom a guess? But this was in the collection. I figured, why not throw this in? And here's another shot of that road, the bridge going over the railroad. But it was unidentified, so I just thought I'd throw those in there. Ed, I thought you might know that road. No, huh?
That whole area is
Boulevard?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, oh well. Another Little Neck electric substation. This is another valuation photograph. Okay, now we're coming home. This is a postcard view, and the station lasted in 1924. I guess the Knickerbocker Pharmacy in Great Neck put out a lot of postcards, which the Historical Society probably has a bunch of them. Hicks Brothers Pharmacists, I guess the pharmacy sold a lot of postcards too. But that's, look at the horse and wagons.
Yeah.
Incredible. This was in Long Island Railroad, a magazine.
Dave, can you go back one? We want to know what direction that is. Facing, the one before that.
Let's see.
Before, yeah.
Yeah.
Is that going east? So that's the stuff on
That's looking east.
Yeah.
the north side. Well, Hicks, that's the Hicks.
Hicks Pharmacy was up north.
Yeah,
This is a view across to the Dunkin' Donuts place.
Yeah, right.
Oh.
Now the tower on the corner that
Oh.
And it's Hicks Lane. Yeah, but that's
No, it's the
That's
station,
way further
looking at
north.
Station
Oh,
Park
at
to
the
the north.
station. Oh, yeah.
About that.
That's who it's named after.
I guess when they built that trestle, they had to lower the tracks a great deal,
Oh, yeah.
because they're way down.
Yes. Yeah. And this was prior to third rail too. You don't see any third rail there either. And this was showing some ladies. This was in the Long Island Railroad magazine. Sadly, the Long Island Railroad basically has no archives, no history. They had a lot of stuff at one time, but who knows what happened. Maybe some of the stuff went into a dumpster like we were talking about before. In the words of the late Vincent Seafried, who was a Queens historian and Long Island Railroad historian, Vince had oftentimes said that if it wasn't for the larceny of its own employees, the Long Island Railroad would have no history. Sadly, I think it's true. You see the stuff I got in my basement. Okay, look at this. This is in their archives here. There's Great Neck Historical Society, or Great Neck Public Library. And there's a shot here, basically what it looks like today.
All of the elimination of crossings, that was in the 30s?
This was 1924, 1925. Yeah, but they occurred at different times, the grade crossing eliminations. This is 1933. I think this might be Fred Weber.
Yeah, there's the Brace building.
Yeah, it's still there.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Certainly looks different in this picture, wow.
There's the grade crossing watchman shanty. And here's the diamond-shaped grade crossing warning sign.
Was those electric gates or hand cranked?
Hand cranked. Hand cranked there.
Sound boy in the 80s.
Yeah, how about that? I don't know, does anybody remember that coal silo? What direction we're looking at? This was a photograph at Great Neck Station showing the coal silo in the background.
That was Cuttermill Road, probably.
No. These, if you don't have these, I'll give you these on a
Dave,
flash
please
drive.
check, but it probably was west of the station going,
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
probably back around where now the firehouse is.
No.
Yeah.
All right. There's Macy's in Jamaica. Does anybody remember going into Macy's in Jamaica? Okay, we got a few people here. I guess that was a pretty big store. Now it's hard to find a Macy's that's still open. Nice nighttime shot at Great Neck. And the Prince George Hotel, and anybody ever hear of that wants to admit it? Yeah, okay. All right, here's a shot, the tower that used to be east of the station. Middle Neck Road and the station. Oh, here's the plaque. I was over there the other day and took this photograph. The plaque. It's nice the plaque was placed there in 1935. Here's a shot. This was inside the Great Neck Station, and I think that some of the switches were controlled from the station, Ed?
So you got the bottle board.
Yeah, yeah.
You got the timer
And,
for changing a switch. So you
Yeah, so it's one of these
interlocking plant there on the left.
photographs like this of personnel in the old days are rather rare. In fact, interior photographs of railroad stations are rare. And when you think about it, in the old days, you had to take a photograph inside using a flash bulb, and then you only got one use out of the flash bulb, and then you couldn't look at the photograph right away as far as the exposure. You had to wait until the negative got developed and you got the photograph back. So that's why not many photographs were taken inside railroad stations. Here's a shot here that I took the other day, and I took it in particular to show that sign. Welcome to Great Neck, home of the Merchant Marine Academy. And the picture of the station building is on there too. This is one of two photographs in this style. I'll show you the photograph in a minute. But the reflection that you see on the photograph, these photographs were printed in glass. It's not a photograph cover with glass. The photograph is actually printed into the glass. And there's 2 of these photographs on display in the railroad station waiting room today. They're about 2 feet by 3 feet, I guess. Here's the original photograph showing a train at the station. And then the other photograph, you actually see the reflection of the windows in this photograph, but that's the photograph. But you'll see these photographs in the station waiting room today, which is nice that they put them there. Does anybody remember Craig Smith? He was a branch line manager during the 90s on the port. Somebody remembers Craig.
They used to have his picture in the Willamette.
That's right, yeah. Nice man. He passed away several years ago. Yes.
Make that sharper. Can you make that?
This was probably a very poor scan that I had.
Had before.
I think that's what we're going to get. That's what we're going to get.
No way to adjust the length.
Yeah.
Unless you got some way to climb up there. Right? No way to adjust.
But anyway, one of my most vivid memories of Great Neck, and Craig Smith was the branch line manager. I think it was a blizzard back in 1996 where service was really going down the tubes, and I was sent over to Great Neck to kind of see if I could help Craig Smith out. We were in the waiting room, and a man came up to Craig. Craig's a big guy, and he's former 101st Airborne too, real tough guy. But anyway, this guy comes up and he cursed out Craig and just so verbally abusive. I thought Craig was going to pound the guy into the floor, but Craig just stood there, listened to the man. Then he looked at the man and he said, "I'm sorry that you feel that way about me." The guy didn't know what to say. He stormed away, and you know what? 2 minutes later, the guy came back and apologized profusely to Craig. So I said, "Craig, you know how to handle a situation, I tell you." That was the day 2 where the service was stopped. There was a train that derailed on the pocket track, which is a siding track, and I guess it ran across the switch or whatever. So service was disrupted almost entirely out here. And the Movement Bureau called me. And they said, "Dave, is the snow up to the 3rd rail yet?" I said, "What 3rd rail? Can't see the 3rd rail." They said, "Oh shit, we're in trouble." But anyway, God bless Craig Smith. Here we go now. This is the late, great Pennsylvania station. And I'm going to tell about the statuary that was on top of the station and the eagles that were on the station building. 2 of those eagles at the Merchant Marine Academy in Kings Point. Outside the gym building, you see one of them in the foreground and the other eagle is back there. And this is another view showing from a different direction. Beautiful, beautiful eagles. This one has a broken claw. In fact, I saw the curator at the museum over there, and I told him about it, so he said he would get it fixed. But that shows you, but fortunately the claw was there, so all they got to do is cement the claw back on. But the plaque there says that they came from Penn Station, and it's kind of hard to read, but it says that the granite is believed to have come from Milford, Massachusetts. Okay, that's interesting. There's a Penn Station eagle at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington. And that's outside the National Zoo. And the bottom line says that it's a pink granite eagle. In my research, I found out that the eagles were not granite. They're carved from marble. So I wrote a letter to the Smithsonian and I said, "I think you're placking." Now, Smithsonian Institution is one of the world's leading historical and scientific institutions in the world, right? And I'm telling them their plaque is wrong. And I didn't hear from them for a couple of months. I figured, I guess they threw my thing in the basket. But then I got a letter, and here it is. The director of the National Zoo said that they had their mineral sciences expert. He confirmed it's marble, not granite, but can't confirm it's Knoxville marble. And I think I'll leave it at that. Eventually, the plaque will be changed to reflect that it is marble and not granite. So I guess you might say that the bottom line with regard to the Penn Station Eagles is, although they are carved in stone, don't take them for granted.
So what, do we know what happened to the fourth one?
Oh, there's many more. Many more. I get to the few more of them. This was.
Book on that one.
Yeah, thank you, Ed. there's eagles on either side of the Madison Square Garden marquee on 7th Avenue. Does anybody remember seeing those eagles?
Oh, sure. Are they still there?
They're not there anymore. They're gone. Yeah. What I understand is that they were taken away and they'll be put someplace at this new Penn Station Farley building complex known as Moynihan Train Hall. So someday you'll see those over there at the Moynihan building, including this statue of Samuel Rea, which was outside the Madison Square Garden entrance. That's gone now too. That's going to be over at the Moynihan Train Hall. Now we get closer to home. Again, this is a Grand Central Station eagle. This is at the end of Kings Point Road. Does anybody know where this eagle might be? At the end of Kings Point Road, it's on a private estate. Yeah. If you drive to the end of Kings Point Road, you could see it from a distance and barely make it out. And it's private property. You'd really have to be on this estate to see it, or out on a boat on the bay there. But it's a beautiful eagle. Edwin Marks had the.
Nancy Marks, that's what it is. Nancy Marks' estate.
You got it. That's right, Nancy Marks. When I did my book, and I did a book on the Grand Central Station Eagles, which I have one of these for everybody here tonight. Don't go home without one. My compliments. The Cast Iron Eagles of Grand Central Station, 32 pages, full color, tells a story including the story of Edwin and Nancy Marks' eagle. Nancy told me when they were going to purchase a house in this area, Edmund looked over, and on vacant property there was the eagle. He said, he fell in love with the eagle, found out the vacant property was for sale, so he bought the property with the eagle. And then when the Grand Central Station Eagle was being dedicated at Lexington Avenue, Edwin Marks had his eagle restored, and he had a big eagle party at his house, invited me to the eagle party. So, and here's what those eagles looked like on the old Grand Central Station building. This was the old Grand Central Depot was expanded in 1898, and these towers were placed on top with the eagles at the corner of the towers. This building lasted till 1910, when it was demolished to make room for the present Grand Central Terminal. Fortunately, the eagles were removed, and they were dispersed to various parts of the Northeast. This is a document that I got at the Great Neck Public Library a number of years ago. I was just over the library last week. I saw Christy. Christy is a lot of you know her, I guess, local history room. And I talked about the document. She brought it out immediately. And I said, it's wrong. It's dead wrong that eagle is not mechanical. It doesn't go up and down. The wings are supposed to go up and down depending on barometric pressure. Those wings are cast iron, weighing several hundred pounds each. There's no way that eagle was mechanical. So Christy said she was going to amend this document sheet. But anyway, before leaving this, I think that Nancy might be thinking about possibly what to do with the eagle because, well, you know, it's like Edmund's been gone, I guess, 10 to 12 years, and I think that we might hear about that eagle being moved, but I don't want to say more. This is the eagle that was placed over the Lexington Avenue entrance at the Grand Central Terminal. It was placed there because there was talk about placing in front of Grand Central Terminal, but they realized that could not be done because Grand Central Terminal was landmark status and it could not be placed there. This new entranceway, it would be okay to place the eagle there because the chairman of the board, E. Virgil Conway, fell in love with that eagle. So they originally, in the architectural plans, had a big clock to go up here. But then when E. Virgil Conway said, I want that eagle at Grand Central, the owner of the eagle in Bronxville donated it or sold it to the MTA, and the eagle was placed up there. And this is the actual photograph that E. Virgil Conway had given to me. There's the photograph. Lori Hawks was her name. Hawks, another bird of prey, Hawks. But anyway, Lori had donated the eagle, and that's E. Virgil Conway, the chairman of the board. And Conway wrote on the back of my photograph here, he says, "Hi, David, you have been so responsible for the Eagles, but especially the return of the Bronxville Eagle to Grand Central. Thanks, E. Virgil Conway." So that's one of my treasured possessions. A few weeks before the dedication ceremony, Maury gave me a call, said, "You're going to be there, aren't you?" I said, "What are you talking about?" I didn't know anything about it. "You don't know it?" Maury said, "I am not going to let them forget you," them meaning the MTA. And I guess she made the phone call. I got notified from E. Virgil Conway to be there, and he gave me the photograph too. But it had not been for Lori Hawks, I would have never been recognized. But that's somehow how bureaucracies work. And then here's the eagle here. The second eagle, which was at Garrison, ended up here at Vanderbilt Avenue and 42nd Street. I don't think it belongs there. I expressed my opinion, but my opinion didn't amount to anything. In my opinion, when Jackie Kennedy fought so hard to have Grand Central Terminal preserved, when she was walking east on 42nd Street, she would not have seen that eagle there. In my mind, that eagle doesn't belong there. But at this later time, the chairman of the MTA, I forget his name at the time, he wanted the eagle. So they brought the issue to the New York Landmarks Preservation Commission. We'd like to put the eagle. We understand the landmark status. However, number one, the eagle's not on the building. Oh, really? It's not on the building, you're saying? And number two, it's only temporary. Well, here we are, like 15 years later, and the thing is still there. Well, you know, when the chairman of the board of the MTA, which is the largest contractor and employer in the New York metropolitan region, wants to go to these people on the Landmarks Preservation Commission to ask permission, he said enough there. especially since I'm being videotaped there. Austin Corbin, he was the man, but president of the railroad. So much was done under the presidency of Austin Corbin, the extension of the railroad out to Montauk, and he was the one that got the plans and the railroad construction company started to construct the Manhasset Viaduct to bring the railroad into Port Washington. He did not live to see the completion of the railroad, but thank goodness for Austin Corbin, who had the plans drawn up and started the ball rolling. Here's a bust of Austin Corbin. Beautiful, life-size bust. You know where it is today?
Iowa.
Where in Iowa? It's at the Putnam Museum in Davenport, Iowa. Why was it out there? Well, Austin Corbin, before he came to Long Island Railroad, he was the president and founder of the First National Bank of Davenport, Iowa. Go to the Wantor Preservation Society on Wantor Avenue, a little bit north of the railroad, and you see the old railroad station building there, and there's the Jamaica, the private car with the observation platform on the back, and this is where the railroad president traveled back in the day when train travel was popular, and also the railroad presidents would travel too on these type of railroad cars, because wherever the president of the United States traveled, the president of that particular railroad would let the president of the United States use his railroad car. Here's Manhasset, still up on the bank, up on the steep bank. Quite a building up so high too, and. It's the opening day at Manhasset. This was a photographs I got in the Long Island Railroad employee publication. There used to be a track going off to where would that? Some sort of freight siding or something, Ed?
Yeah, it's pretty much where the park is now opposite Town Hall.
Yeah.
But it was electrified, if you notice. If you go back there, you'll notice it's got third rail
Yes.
on it.
Yeah.
Which is typical of the DD1 era.
No. Yeah. And here's some Weber photographs again. And here's the Long Island Railroad publication. This Manhasset Plandome Road.
Wow.
Anybody familiar with this? There was the railroad is way in the distance here. But look at the line. The line is going past the Bohack store, going into the A&P. Look at the size of that line.
Wow.
I think they were buying supplies for the coronavirus. Who knows? Who knows? That's what Costco looks like today, they're saying. But anyway, interesting photograph there.
Wow, that's...
Here we go, the viaduct. The Manhasset Viaduct, built in completed 1898. The highest bridge on Long Island, 81 feet above the water, 679 feet long, 3 steel piers, and that was responsible for the railroad going into Port Washington.
Dave, in that last picture, now this is something that's often a problem when you're dealing with postcards. Look at that train. Somebody has photo-touched in a toy train locomotive.
Oh, really?
Look carefully at it.
Yeah.
That's genuine marks. And the railroad cars are, I'm not sure what they are, but I mean, this is, when you're dealing with, and I've done this, I've had this a lot, I've had arguments, they whip out the photograph, I said, well, whose error? All this was hand-colored.
In Germany.
Retouched.
And Marx is German product,
No,
right?
I'm talking about Marx,
Yeah, the German Marx. Yeah, trains too. All right, yeah, we go. Here's the this station burned down in 1987, and they rebuilt it. The railroad wasn't going to build it to be as nice looking as the original station or the early station, but the pressure was put on the railroad, and they built it to look like this station that burned down. They did a very nice job on it too. Here we go.
It was arson.
Port Washington, yes, that's right. The engineer, first name, the first train was William H. Gravin, and when the railroad celebrated the 100th anniversary of the arrival of the railroad to Port Washington, we were able to contact the grandson of the first engineer, and he was at the event too. Beautiful railroad station building with the eyebrow window. Here's the president of the railroad's private car. These photographs were taken on the opening day.
Dave?
Uh-huh.
The railroad's private car there, that's business car 200.
Uh-huh.
The later president of the railroad had a little habit during Prohibition of smuggling alcohol. They got caught by Prohibition agents.
Uh-oh.
The car was confiscated.
Really?
They weren't paying.
How about that? Yeah, right.
Well,
There's another shot here. This is a postcard view.
There goes
It looked like there might have been a little bit of touching up here with that postcard view. Another shot. And here's a shot looking, this might have been a Fred Weber shot looking toward the railroad station. Now it's all different, high-level platforms today with canopies. This is a Fred Weber shot. I love this one because it shows the Chiclets vending machines on the platform. Anybody remembers Chiclets? This I took a week or so ago. I was pleased to see the interior of the Port Washington Railroad Station because there's a bulletin board up there with historic photographs in it. It's right there. I put that up about 30 years ago. So nicely, they renovated the station, they took it down, they saved it, and they remounted again. So that's nice to see that it's there. There's also a plaque to the right of the ticket window, and that's to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the railroad entering Port Washington. This was along the track, rode up the event. There's postmark for the event, Port Washington Extension, Long Island Railroad. And here's I have one of these too. This is a ceramic tile. And I have ceramic tiles. I got an Eagle book, and I got a ceramic tile here for everybody present tonight. Here's the 6-inch ceramic tile, Port Washington. It's got a cork back, hanging on the wall, use it for a hot plate or whatever. But I got one of those for everybody tonight too, and that's what the railroad did for the 100th anniversary of Port Washington. I have here too, this was a foam board photograph that the railroad actually produced a series of these for the 150th anniversary. And this was the opening of Port Washington's station on June 23rd, 1898. There's a nice picture there, and I'm presenting that to the Port Washington Historical Society tonight. So Chris, you could have that. Pick that up before you leave, okay? All right there. So you could have one of these maps too. You might say, well, what's so special about this map? Well, this was, I think, a 1994 or whatever map, but this is the last map that the railroad printed that has the 10 stations that were abandoned in 1998. Southampton College Station, Holtzville, whatever other
Are they
stations.
still abandoned?
abandoned means they're gone.
Yeah.
They abandoned them.
But they did that with.
In fact, the railroad doesn't like to say abandoned, they like to say closed. I also have a Port Washington timetable. Don't use this to looking up a train tomorrow, because this is a 1984 timetable. It has the 150th anniversary logo on it. So you could have one of these too before you leave tonight. And then I think that's about it.
Make time for some questions?
Questions? Yes.